factory had 2 cranes, forklift, cutting 2 big saws, polishing machines, table saws. It had all the equipment that a sculptor would possibly need. And so we just took the factory and turned it into artist studios. When we first got to Pietrasanta, there were 150 studios in town. Now there's probably 5. Most of them are closed, most of the men have retired. The knowledge is being lost, and it's all over. But we started our own studio. We were the only studio in the area that was run by Americans. And because we were Americans, we don't have a time clock. The Italian studios at 5 o'clock, they were closed and everybody went home. We stayed open till midnight. We started work at 6 in the morning. We worked on Sundays. We had no rules. We were open all the time. And we were on a major street. So we had people coming through the studio, artists coming through the studio. And we lived on the little street on the opposite side of the studio. So our house, the studio sort of closed down at night and everybody migrated into our kitchen. So life was a constant flow of individuals and artists from all over the place who were looking for stone, buying tools, wanting a space to work, and they all came to our house. Pretty much anybody who came through our house bought something from us, because we always have something for sale at a price that someone can afford. When I first got to Italy, I asked someone to show me where to buy a piece of stone, and he took me to a little factory on a little side street in a warren of little streets, and I bought my first block of marble from this guy. And I remembered him. I later carved my first major piece that that sold the Sephora Oasis, and I got that marble at another place, and Renato had come and visited up there in the valley where I carved that first major monumental piece, and he remembered seeing me. My third trip to Italy, I decided to go back to Renato and look for a piece of stone, and so I intuited where he was, and I found my way back to there. And when I walked in, he was walking out, and I saw him, and I said, "I know you." And he said, "I know you." I said, "I bought my first block of stone from you." And he said, "You're the guy who carved that big piece up in Val di Castello last year." So we knew each other, but from different sources. He remembered me from the carving, and I remembered him from selling me the block of stone. He ended up giving me a place to work there, and I worked there for 3 years by myself before we turned it into a studio. And his business was going downhill because automation was outdoing him. The modern machines went faster than his old machines did. So he was looking for income, and I said, well, let's start renting out studio space.
What was the nature of his business?
He was a marble. He did you know, when you go into a bank and you see a little piece of marble with a pin in it, he made the little marble holder for the pin to be attached. Or he did bases for trophies. He took a big blocks of marble, 20-ton block of marble, and would slice it up into little slabs, and then cut those slabs into little squares and polish them and do the edges and drill the holes and the countersunk holes in the bottom.
But he was not sculpting. He was just making
it was
figures.
Just a factory. But the factory had 2 cranes, forklift, cutting 2 big saws, polishing machines, table saws. It had all the equipment that a sculptor would possibly need. And so we just took the factory and turned it into artist studios.
And you were the first sculptor.
I was the first one, and I was his friend, and he was the same age as my father, and he had lost a son in childbirth, and so he became the father that I was always looking for, and I became the son he was always looking for, and
it was a good match.
We had a wonderful time together, creating the studio and unloading trucks and loading trucks, and it was all in Italian because he never spoke English. Nobody spoke. The Italians don't speak English, and I learned my Italian on the run, not from books. So I couldn't tell you how to write it, but I could speak it. Because the studio was built on the land of his brother-in-law. Renato didn't have any land. His brother-in-law had all of this land. He was a farmer. They had married sisters. Renato's wife and Carlo's wife were sisters. And when Carlo's wife dies, Carlo's kids get him declared incompetent and take over the property and kick us off, basically, is how it happened. Because Carlo and Renato never had a piece of paper that said he had the right to be on Carlo's land.
Okay.
And so as soon as Carlo's kids got the control of the land, they said, get off our land.
So when that happened, then you left Italy, is it?
No, that was 5 years later we left Italy.
Oh.
But we had to leave the studio, and leaving the studio meant I had to reinvent myself because the studio had been the source of our income. People came and stopped because the studio was where it was at. It was
easy to do the work there.
It was easy to work there. It was, and I had a constant source of marble. I had this wonderful studio, all this machinery, and to move to another studio was not so easy. It's not because there weren't studios, but I have a reputation of being able to produce a vast amount of work every year. I produce maybe 30 sculptures a year. So most studios don't want me because I take up too much space. And so they would let me come, but they would say, you can only carve a piece here, and then you have to leave. Because I'll fill up their whole storage space in a year. Or they would say, yeah, but we're going to have to charge you more rent. And I couldn't pay more rent. So even though everybody likes me, they also are aware if you give him an inch, he'll take a mile. If you let him come in here, he'll start producing pieces left and right, and they're going to be all over the place. And,
now, your working process was different among the people they were used to then at that point?
Right. My working process is so different that I'm able to produce things much quicker than anybody else. So I can produce vast quantities of work. And another thing that happened is I produce work that oftentimes people like. So if I produce a lot of work, and when people do come, they come and buy from me, then I'm not a desirable person to have in your studio because I grab all the clients, right? But when it was my studio, it was our studio. I was the main guy.